for the session of Azure Power Lunch. Today we are going to be talking about upcoming changes to default outbound access in Azure. There is a big retirement of some features is coming, so that's why we're going to talk about it. Just as a housekeeping, there won't be any session for the next 3 weeks. Summer break, July 4th, July 11th, July 18th. No sessions. We will be back on July 25th. So in 3 weeks. So this is the last session for the next 3 weeks. Okay. So with that, let's talk about the agenda. We are going to be talking about what is the default access and what is being retired, what features are being retired in September, and how we can kind of do some mitigation action now and to address those changes that are coming. And we will see some demo just to see uh, what exactly we are talking about, just to see these things in action. So please feel free to ask if you have any questions. So first of all, in talking about the default access, so let's say that you have a virtual machine that is inside running inside a VNet in a subnet, and that is not a private subnet. Okay, the machine doesn't have a public IP, doesn't is not behind a load balancer, is not there's no NAT gateway attached to the subnet, all of that. Okay, in that case, if you try to access resources over the internet, outbound access is provided as of today default by Microsoft. Okay, so it will get a public IP address for outbound access. That public IP address may change, but there will be a default outbound access. So once you have, as I said, a VM without public IP, without any NAT access to the subnet, without being behind a load balancer, you will have um, outbound default outbound access as of today. Okay, but that feature is going away in September. So if you have an existing subnet, so let's say you have an existing subnet today, you have some VMs running, they will continue to be running the way they are. Outbound access will be there September and beyond. Okay, you deploy a new VM in that subnet, existing subnet that you have today. It will enjoy the outbound access, default outbound access as I described. No changes. But if you create a new subnet, okay, in um in let's say you create a new subnet in after September when the default access is retired, and you deploy a VM in that, there won't be any default outbound access. And you will have to use explicit ways to provide outbound access. And let's talk about first those what are different ways to do that. One, you put a public IP on a VM. You attach one or more public IPs, and that's how you get the outbound access. That's one way of doing it. Second one, you put the VM behind a load balancer. You deployed a VM, have a load balancer, you put behind a load balancer, and that's how it will get the outbound access. Okay. Third one, you create a NAT gateway and attach it to the subnet where the VM is, and your VM doesn't have a public IP or anything. It will to get the outbound access, it will use the public IP of the NAT gateway or whatever IP address prefixes that are attached. It will use that for that outbound access. So these are ways of explicit connectivity. And this flowchart, by the way, I have included a link to this article. The resources, so you can take a look if you want to know more detail. But this is kind of a flow chart. So let's say how Azure decides when to give default outbound access and when to use the explicit method. So let's say that you have a VM that is running. First thing is going to check if there is a virtual firewall appliance there. If there's a virtual firewall appliance, it will use that. Any sort of read, it's like routing all traffic to the appliance, and there's a UDR there. It will be used, and your traffic will go through that. Okay, that's the first thing it checks. Then, if there's a NAT gateway, that's important. So NAT gateway takes precedence over public IP. So that's the second thing it will use. Third one is if there is a um, if there is a public IP attached to the VM, okay, then that will take precedence or that will take effect. If that is not the case, then comes the outbound rules of a load balancer. So let's say you have a load balancer sitting there and the VM is in its backend pool. That's important. Just sitting a load balancer is not enough. The VM has to be in the backend pool. In that case, that will um, be there. If none of these conditions are there, then you get the outbound access. Okay, so that's where, let's say you just put a VM without a public IP inside a VNet where it's not a private subnet. Okay, in a non-private subnet, that's where the default outbound access is provided. Okay, and just keep in mind, you should not use this. You should basically you should never allow unbound egress from your subnet. Try to take advantage of private subnet as much as you can because of some of the data exfiltration concern. I know, I'm sure your customer or you yourself, I know my customer, they regularly block access because what is the concern? Concern is somebody puts a malicious application on your VM that is running in a VNet, which is with a non-private subnet, in a VNet and a non-private subnet, and they started, you know, sending data back to a hacker, maybe a dark storage account somewhere in the cloud. Okay, that's the data exfiltration we are talking about. Okay? So anything has to be explicit. So once you have a method like a explicit method, ideally it should be NAT gateway. Okay? Ideal method recommendation is NAT gateway. When you look at the article, and other disadvantages. Let's say that you're not concerned about data exfiltration and all, and you say, okay, I'm just going to put the VM. The other thing is that if you are accessing a third-party service over the internet, over the cloud, and that third-party service is relying on your IP address to allow lists to access that, you may lose that IP address. Yes, keep in mind that the IP address, the outbound IP address that is provided as a part of this access is the default outbound access is not guaranteed. It may change. So maybe today you have an IP address and you say, hey, this is my IP address and use that. And then suddenly the next day, that IP address may not be there. And what's happened? Your application breaks because it may be relying on that service. And as soon as that you're trying to access that service, it will not allow you because your IP address has changed. So that can happen. Okay, so that's why you should use it. And there are some other things as well with the um, just keep in mind if you have multiple NICs on the same VM, IP address will not be consistent, okay, on those. And if you have contiguous IP addresses or expecting contiguous IP addresses for a VM in a scale set, that will not happen with the default outbound access. It will assign whatever IP address is available. So you cannot just rely, okay, I'm using continuous IP address. That will not happen. They may come out from they may be very different. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay. Uh, so how you address it? I mean, what are different ways to go to the explicit uh, IP address? Number one, take advantage of the private subnet. And we will take a look in the demo. So the best thing you can do right now is start going through your application, looking where are using you're using explicit IP, and start taking advantage of the private subnet parameter. That is GA that we have talked about in the past. Once you do it, it will block outbound access from your subnet. Period. You have to use basically an explicit way like a NAT gateway to get that access, outbound access. Okay, so that's that's one of the key thing. Keep that in mind. Okay, and then try to use an explicit outbound connectivity method like a NAT gateway, a standard load balancer, or a public IP. Ideally, you should be using NAT gateway. Okay, and just keep in mind if you, in regards to the VM scale set, if you are using the flexible orchestration model do not have default outbound access. You have to use an explicit outbound access to do it. So you are covered there. Okay. So just these are some of the things that you can do today to get ready for the change that's coming on um, in September 2005. Any questions before we quickly jump into the demo? So, folks, here is I have some virtual machines. I'm gonna go in here. There are three virtual machines I that you can see from the status that is running. One is my jump VM that is here. That's my jump VM that I go in to access other VMs. And then I have two other VMs that are running in two subnets, two different subnets. Okay. One subnet, and let's go into that VNet here. There are two subnets here. One is the VM subnet. And if you look here, this is a public subnet. It allows outbound access, free outbound access. This parameter is not checked. Okay. Then I have this private subnet, which have this parameter checked, and there is no gateway assigned. Okay. So what we are going to do is we are going to go into these VMs and see, check the behavior. How does thing work? Okay. First thing I want to show you here, let's come to this pub VM. Why I'm calling it a pub VM? Because it is in a subnet which is does not have the private, um, which is a non-private subnet. Okay, so it allows outbound access. If I look at the network settings, okay, give it a second to come up. As you can see, there is no public IP assigned. Okay, so I'm just gonna log into this one and see what happens. Okay, so this is that, and let me sign in, get my super secret password, sign in. Okay, so I signed in, and the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a quick curl. Hopefully, everybody can still see my screen. Okay, look, there is no IP address assigned, but it gives me, I mean, I'm trying to access this site. This is basically ipconfig.b. It's a site that gives you back your IP address, what IP address it's seeing. It's giving me an IP address. So this is the default outbound access. Okay, it's enabled, no public IP, but I'm inside a non-private subnet. So this is the example. Just keep in mind, this will not work after September. Um, okay, once again, just a caveat, it will continue to work for existing subnet, but if you create a new subnet after September, it will not work. Okay. So now let's jump in to another subnet. I have another VM that is in a private subnet. Okay. So let's go there. So I am now in that subnet, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to run the same command here. Okay. And look what's going to happen. It's just going to hang because it doesn't have a public IP. There's no outbound. So this thing is just going to hang. It's not going to go anywhere. It's going to give me a timeout after some time. So since we don't have like unlimited time, so I'm just going to do a control C. Okay. I hope you understand it. In a public subnet, I'm able to access it. This will continue to work after September. If you create a new subnet which has is non-private, it will not work after September. If it's a private subnet, it works the same way. That's why I'm preferring to start, you know, kind of adapting the recommended practices and go from there. Okay. So now let's try something. So now we have a private subnet. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go into that private subnet here, and this is the private subnet, and I am going to assign a NAT gateway. So I have this NAT gateway here. This is my NAT gateway. As you can see, it has one public IP address assigned, and I am going to go in here and I'm gonna say give assign this NAT gateway here. So once you assign the NAT gateway, now you're saying, hey, you can howl traffic through that NAT gateway. I mean, you can, and it will get a consistent IP. And let's look at the NAT gateway IP address. This is the public IP address of the NAT gateway here. Click on that. This is the outbound IP. Okay, just keep this IP address in mind. Okay, now let's go back to our test machine here and let's try the same thing. This, look, we got the, again, we got the same IP address. If uh, you did not see, this is the IP address. So we are seeing the NAT gateway IP address. So basically, this is the recommendation. That's the recommended way moving forward that you should be using for your IP address, unless until they are in the scale set of some things like that. Any questions? So let's do a quick recap, and I'm gonna go back to the slide here. This one, this slide. So just keep in mind that the default outbound access that your VM enjoys today, when it doesn't have a public IP, it is not behind a load balancer, not using a firewall, not routed by a firewall, and not using a NAT gateway, it automatically gets a public IP. That's the Azure behavior. That's kind of a outbound access that will be going away after uh, after September. Okay? So that's something that will be going away after September. Just keep that in mind. Just keep in mind if you have existing VNets, subnets, you deploy new VMs in there, they will continue to work the way they are. Any new subnet that will be created after September, they will not, the VMs in that will not get the default outbound access. Just keep in mind, existing VMs in the subnets, existing subnets, or new VMs in the existing subnets will continue to work. Any new subnets that you create after September, VMs in that will not get outbound access. You will have to use uh, one of the ways, either providing a public IP for the VM, using them as a backend for a load balancer, or preferred way, use a NAT gateway for the outbound access. That you will have to do to provide this sort of outbound access for your virtual machines. This is very important in a sense because a lot of organizations are kind of relying on this type of access, without realizing that this retirement may impact them as they move for, as this feature is being retired in September. So just keep that in mind. And one other thing is, if you try to use for VM scale sets, try to use flexible orchestration because it by default does not allow outbound access. Okay, so that's kind of that will help you use anyways explicit outbound access for your VM scale sets. Okay, in the resource, let me just show you here in the resource for this in the presentation towards the end. I have shared the link, the retirement link, and this article about the default outbound access in Azure and how you can address it, um, kind of how you can get ready for it. Let's put it this way. All of that is there. So I just want to open up for any questions. If there are no questions, I will give everybody their 7 minutes back. Just a quick heads up that we won't have any Azure Power Lunch session for the next 3 weeks. So hope to see everybody starting from 7:25. Thank you for joining and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and a great weekend.
Thank you.